don't know about you, but every year, starting around New Year's Day, I want to change my life. I am always tempted to make at least one New Year's resolution. I want to change something because probably because I've been spending too much, eating too much, exercising too little all of December, and things are feeling out of kilter. But usually around the first of the year, I think, okay, maybe this kind of self-reckoning is just a holy uneasiness, just a part of my annual spiritual journey. And this year, a wise teacher of mine said, I think you need to go back to Dante's The Divine Comedy to see how he deals with this sense of unease that you feel every year. In the Divine Comedy, Dante begins by saying, I found myself in a dark forest, for the right way was lost. This is me in December, feeling kind of lost. And what happens? He meets the ghost of one of his favorite writers, Virgil. And Virgil's ghost wants to show him the way out of his dark wood of errors, right? So they enter through the hell gate. And Dante gets to view all the reasons for his confusion and his feelings of being lost. Hell, he discovers, is shaped like an ice cream cone, with the outer rim along the top full of whiners and complainers and judgy people. And then he gets further down as the cone gets smaller and denser, hotter, and he finds a lot of people who are telling kind of white lies. Those kinds of lies that we all tell to be part of the social construct of life, saying things, like, you look great in that dress. Those kinds of things. But Virgil says, gradually when you say those kinds of things, you begin to trade your own feelings for what is acceptable. And then further down in the cone are the humans who lied and cheated for their own self-gain, hurting others without care along the way. And at the very bottom of the cone, where it gets really heated and sticky and muckety-muck, are those people who lied to themselves about their own self-worth, giving up their personal integrity to do what they've been enculturated to want or are supposed to do in order to reap all the promised rewards of life, those Mount Delectables, prosperity, good times. And he notices that as they try harder and harder to reap the benefits of all the wrong things, they betray themselves and they become stuck in a lot of self-loathing. That's at the very bottom. Now, each of these levels of hell are based on some kind of lie. Even at the top, all that disgruntlement is usually due to some sort of stereotyping or bias, wrong judgment, listening to somebody else's opinion about something or someone, making righteous claims without really knowing all of the truth. So we find that hell, and I'm using this as a metaphor for the spiritual journey, not hell later, but hell now. Hell is lies all the way down. But the deepest, darkest, hottest, muckiest part of hell are reserved for those who lie to themselves about their own self-worth. I challenge you to accept the following words into your heart. You are infinitely worthy. You are infinitely precious. You have always been enough. There is no place where you do not belong. Now, if you had trouble accepting any of those, you're not alone. You're not alone, because we are socialized not to believe these truths, lest we become, too full of ourselves, right? How many times did you hear growing up, oh, you're just so full of yourself? Well, I've looked at that phrase and I think now, well, what else are we supposed to be full of? The 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism begin by asking us to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. How often do we think of ourselves when we hear that principle? When we claim that love is at the center of all we do, how many of us think about ourselves? Dante says that unless we work on that, if we don't cleanse ourselves from feelings of self-criticism, if we don't rid ourselves of that big lie, then we tend to want to lie about other things as well. We all have those lies that we tell ourselves, those in order to find those Mount Delectables of life. And this morning, I'm thinking about 3 major lies that I told myself, 3 stereotypes that I had throughout my life. You know, Carl Jung says that we need to have, about every 20 years, we need to reframe the way we look at the world. And each of my reframing took place in my 20s, and then my 40s, and then in my 60s. In my 20s, the lie that I told myself was around sexism. I had many wise, grown-up people telling me that it made perfect sense that the men that I was working with made twice as much money as I did because they had families to support. I had to do a lot of reframing in my 20s to think of myself as being worthy of the same salary that they were making. And then in my 40s, I faced my own heterosexism, and I had to come to terms with the fact that maybe it wasn't a sin that I was able to fall in love with both men and women. And in my 60s, I faced ageism. I found that people suddenly felt that They had the right to decide what I was capable of instead of allowing me to decide what I was capable of. Radical love requires that we dig at the root and examine all of our biases, whether those biases are against ourselves or others. I found that in each case, I had to rid myself of those biases by going through 3 steps, which I call now naming, claiming, and de-shaming. Naming, claiming, and de-shaming. Naming means to give a name to whatever that confusion feels like. What bias is present? When people complain that boomers should just step aside, or they complain about millennials, or they say something like, well, that's just the way children are nowadays. Those are all forms of ageism. We can name that. Stereotyping based on age. And then claiming asks that we be honest with ourselves about who we are and what it means, without the stereotypes, without the preconceptions. De-shaming means being proud of what we claim. Acknowledging, for instance, for me, that I'm now 71 years old, and a long life is actually a gift. And it also means being prepared to challenge the power structures that want to tell me a different story. This morning, I want to remind you all that you are perfect just as you are. And if you can accept that, this will affect the pattern of all of your relationships. Your words and actions, the way you treat yourself, will affect the people around you, and then their words and actions will affect the people around them. And in time, we find we have love for ourselves and all the way down. And this, Dante tells us, is how we get to heaven. How do we learn to trust that? There are spiritual practices. My favorite is meditation, where I listen to my own thoughts without judgment, honoring what I'm feeling, as we did in our meditation this morning, watching my thoughts as they pass by. I often find that I end up in self-criticism. And that's a good thing to notice. And then to say at the end, you're fine. It's okay, rather than getting snagged. When we can show up for ourselves on a regular basis, being full of ourselves, we begin to notice how much easier it is to show up for others, how much easier it is to speak our minds with kindness when that is needed, how much easier it is to communicate with those you previously believed were beyond any kind of rational conversation. There is nothing wrong, in theory, with New Year's resolutions, but often they serve as a cudgel to eradicate pieces of ourselves that we don't like. In other words, it's just self-criticism masquerading as self-improvement. Radical self-love asks us to begin at the root and claim for ourselves our own inherent worth and dignity as the core reason for thinking about any changes we want to make. Dante reminds me that self-love is the most radical love there is. It is not selfish. It is, in fact, simply stewardship for the only gift we have to give to the world. So it is holy work. May you know the grace that this knowledge brings in this new year, 2024. And may you find love at the very center of your being. Amen, and blessed be.